to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week, we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, the host of the podcast, and Rich Dugan and Hunter Beaumont, two of our pastors here at Fellowship, are with me today. Welcome. So glad you both are here.
What's going on?
Autumn, it's great to be here. I feel like I often don't get a first and second name introduction, so
it's true.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure it was clear to everyone since Rich is joining us today, and maybe we have some new listeners, and just went with it. Felt right to do first and last name today.
We're recording this prior to the AFC Championship game, although it will come out after the AFC Championship game. Autumn is wearing her Broncos vintage sweater. Mm-hmm. And so shout out to Bo Nix and get well, Bo. And thanks for the victory last week. I have now forgiven the fumble he had against Arkansas that was not called a fumble and therefore allowed Auburn to win the game. I've forgiven that now. And
you hung on to it for a while, though.
I have hung on to it for a while.
You feeling okay going into
we're good.
This with number two?
I believe in steady.
Mm-hmm. Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody's got to, somebody's got to. Yeah.
The Giants fan over here is feeling pretty cocksure of himself after that John Harbaugh hire.
Yeah. Hey, I'm rooting for the Broncos. Go Broncos.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's right. We are in Colorado. We're a church in Denver.
That's right.
Go Broncos.
Yeah. Got to pull for them. Got to pull for them.
Yeah. Although I, as the Colorado native in the room, also have the added burden of birthright carrying. That's right. Carrying this.
Autumn likes to play that Colorado
like a
native
true native
card,
so-called native. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll take you someday, Rich, to where I grew up, and then you can see.
I'll believe. I'm ready. Take me on a trip.
Autumn grew up in the unsexy Colorado.
That is right. Yep. We get double claim to being natives or something.
That's right. Pioneer settlers.
That's right.
Family came on wagons. Mm-hmm. Stopped.
That is sometimes the Western lore feels a little bit more alive out there because it's not unusual to see people in actual Western garb. You drive past a lot of ranch land that have a lot of cattle grazing and horses, and there are still things that happen like brandings, and they're big community events, and lots of people come and join in. So when people from outside that culture show up there, it actually feels a little bit like that.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. They don't show up in their Canada Goose jackets.
No.
Yeah.
Nope. All right. Well, that is not what we are here to talk about today. Although I'm glad we covered that ground. Yeah, it's probably helpful.
It was good ground to cover.
Yeah.
I don't know anything of it. I'm from Jersey, so yeah, I get it.
Yeah. Well, Rich is the lead pastor at our North Metro congregation, Hunter at our South Broadway congregation, and the two of you lead our church together. And so in our conversation today, I wanted both of you to be here because we're going to look ahead together at our year. And in some of our recent conversations, Hunter and I have talked about a rhythm that many of us maintain at the beginning of our year. We reflect on the year past, look ahead at the year to come, and ask God for some direction in the year ahead of us. Ask God to help us set our priorities. And in those conversations, we often talk about how you can do this as a family, how many people who we know, pastors on our staff, some of our staff members, have rhythms that they have developed over time about doing this sort of same process, looking at the year ahead, asking God to define their priorities, give them direction, ask how they're going to use their resources. And you do this too for our church. And so I wanted to be able to just have a conversation today that is, in a sense, a family meeting and a way that we can look together at 2026, look ahead at 2026 and share it with, especially with our church family, but with our listeners, and to ask, what are our priorities as a church and where do we need to grow and how can we pray together? And as a church family, I hope that this is invitational and exciting to think about how God's at work.
And if you're not part of Fellowship Denver, maybe you're in a different city, part of a different church. I at least have a couple of cousins that fit that category who are regular listeners. I think this is an exciting time, an exciting window of opportunity for the greater church in America right now. And a lot of what we're contemplating at Fellowship really maps on to what's happening with the larger, broader church. And so I hope this helps you reflect on just what God is doing in the church. I think it's an exciting time, and I also foresee there will be difficulties ahead for the larger church in America. Anytime the kingdom of God advances, the enemy pushes back. And I've begun to both notice and to think about what that's probably going to be like in the next 10 to 15 years. And so it's not like everything's just always up and to the right, but I do think it's an exciting time in the life of the church. And so hopefully this helps you understand some of that too, and see some of that.
Yeah. Is there, I know I'm not the hostess, excuse me. But some of those like yellow flags that you see for the future, like at a high level, what would you say they are?
One of the biggest ones I've started to get a peek of, and is there's going to probably be a little resurgence of liberal theology or progressive Christianity. Mm-hmm. That happens historically. That has happened almost every time there is also a surge of gospel-centered Christianity, kind of historic, orthodox, biblically centered Christianity. It's often followed by a little liberal kind of counter surge, and I saw that. That's happened historically in America. I got to live through one of those. We planted Fellowship in 2006, and that was a really exciting time for the bigger church in America of reaching millennials, and we were really part of that as well. And then after that surge happened, there started to be several prominent leaders and then also just not prominent leaders and just normal lay people who I think partly because of like some residual cynicism toward evangelicalism, adopted strains of theology that just simply deny some of the central tenets of the scriptures and reduce the faith to a more culturally accommodationist or comfortable position. And that happened, and it took some of the energy and the steam out of the advance that we had seen. It peeled off a layer of people who had vibrant experiences. And so that was it kind of caught me a little flat-footed when it happened. And I remember thinking at the time, like, I should not have been caught flat-footed by this. I don't know history. And so we're having another surge with Gen Z now that's followed on the heels of the millennials. There's a lot of statistical evidence that they are showing interest in faith, and everyone's excited about that. I would expect that there's going to be an attempt by the enemy to divert some of that into strains of forms of Christianity that really deny its power. Yeah. And that's a appalling term, a form of godliness that denies its power, and that's what liberal Christianity is. So I think that will happen, and I've been reading some about that this week. So that's just been top of mind.
Yeah. That's insightful.
It's okay, Rich, that you asked a question.
Thanks.
It's all right. Yeah.
Sin among leaders was a big issue too.
Yeah.
In my generation of pastoral leaders, I have so many friends and guys that I was like collegial with, if they weren't close friends, at least we were networked together. And there was a lot of sin that surfaced among us and among our father's generation that wasn't evident when we first started out, and the enemy used that to dampen some of the enthusiasm, and we've had to walk through that. And I would expect the same thing with the next generation of leaders. Some of the prominent leaders right now who are younger will not last, and that will be discouraging to a lot of people's faith. And so we're going to have to be prepared to lead people through that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think, Hunter, too, what you were saying a moment ago about the way that when the gospel advances, then usually we see a counter sort of movement and an attendant kind of growth of a liberal form of Christianity? If I think back to the era that you just mentioned in Denver, I wonder if some of that too is a reaction of young people who are actually excited about the gospel, but concerned about the way that certain churches that tend to be very politically conservative marry the gospel with their political movements. I say that because in many conversations with when I was 20 years ago and younger and still a Colorado native, I think about many of the conversations I had with people who had moved to Denver from the Bible Belt or the South or places that were more culturally Christian. And now that they were immersed in a more secular culture, they would look sort of with more critical eyes back at the way they had been raised. And some of those critiques about cultural Christianity or the norms in cultural Christianity, the way that sometimes the gospel could be co-opted by a political movement, some of those concerns were valid or true, or to a certain extent. And so I wonder if in a city like ours, some of that reaction is also, especially among young people, is also against a form of Christianity that they see as being not genuine or not historically accurate.
I think that is a key thing the enemy uses to generate cynicism. And I saw that just like you were describing. So what happens is we get cynical about maybe forms of conservative Christianity that are orthodox in their doctrine, but maybe they're over-married to politics, or they emphasize that. We get cynical about that, and maybe rightly so. But then the enemy can use that cynicism to then divert us into a different form of Christianity that denies the orthodox doctrine, you know? And so the people that some of the most critical voices toward like politically conservative evangelicalism tend to be theological, not just political liberals, but theological liberals, right? And so that they will use that as kind of because you agree with their critique, you then start to adopt some of their theology. Just to give an example of that, like there's a rising younger politician in Texas. He's running, I believe, for the Senate, named James Tallarico, who is a liberal Protestant, and he's a very articulate, educated liberal Protestant. But he sounds like classic liberal Protestantism if you know the history. He actually, I would say, he believes something that sounds like Christianity that really doesn't have much of the substance of Christianity in it, which sounds harsh, but I'm just making like a factual statement. Just, like I'm a man and you're a woman. Those are just factual statements, So I think that's happening, and I've watched even some of my friends kind of be like, yeah, this guy's finally a form of Christianity, I can like identify with, and that's because they dislike political conservative Christians, And the other interesting thing about that, though, is this week I've read 2 critiques of James Tallarico, and they have not come from the typical political conservatives. They have come from orthodox, biblically conservative thinkers who are either less political or more politically neutral. So Justin Giboney of the One Campaign made a very articulate critique of James Tallarico and his theology. Did I say the One Campaign? The And Campaign.
And
Sorry,
campaign.
not
Yeah.
Bono.
You got it.
Not
You got
Bono, but the And Campaign.
I thought you meant Bono.
Justin Giboney of the And Campaign, who is not a political conservative, he made a very potent critique on social media of some stuff that James Tallarico had said, and said this is warmed over Protestant liberalism, and even if you don't like the politics, all the politics of MAGA, this is not an authentically Christian response to it. It was powerful statement to make. And then the president of Asbury Seminary, Asbury is in the Methodist tradition. They are in the conservative evangelical part of the Methodist tradition, so they're now part of the global, or the president's part of the global Methodist Church that split off from the United Methodist Church. But he published this week a very articulate kind of analysis of Tallarico's theology, and it was a long form piece on his Substack and very well prepared. And they have dealt with this issue of theological liberalism inside the Methodist Church, so he's seen it up front. So my point in raising that was like these are not the MAGA conservatives who are seeing this clearly. These were people that sit in a little different place culturally, and yet they see this very clearly, and that raised up the flag for me. Like, oh, this is an issue.
One of
ways that we go about
our
ministry. I'm going to go back.
ways
Jesse.
that we go about ministry.
I'm going to go back, Jesse.
In our DNA class, so our sort of introductory class to fellowship, we talk about this bridge and identify our values as a church. And one of the things that has characterized fellowship since it was planted in 2006 is that we want to be biblically sound and orthodox and hold on to the historicity of the church, of the movement that we are part of, and orthodoxy and scripture, and to do so in a way that is knowledgeable about our context and knowledgeable about the people who we want to invite in. And so I'm so glad you asked this question, Rich, and that this gave us a way to kick off our conversation today, because I want to continue to do that, hopefully here on the podcast, and then in the way that we present scripture, when we teach it, we do so always with an eye to both of those. So I appreciate you laying some of that out, saying what you're seeing as far as the landscape as you look out over American Christianity, and probably what we can anticipate as a church here in Denver happening within the next year or so as we see new movements develop. So if we narrow our focus now back to fellowship and looking at what is ahead for our church this year, what would, and in each of these questions, I would love for both of you to weigh in from your perspective, and perhaps to speak to how those answers might take shape, if there is a way that this would happen specifically at North Metro or at South Broadway for our two different congregations. But my first question is, just as a church family, what are our priorities for 2026? So as you look at the year ahead and ask God to lead you and our elders in identifying our priorities, where we are going to channel our resources, what are those?
Well, I think of the first part of the year as preparing our hearts, and especially as in the lead up to Easter. And one of the themes that we don't need to belabor again, because we did a whole episode about it. I listened back to it yesterday. I still liked it on New Life. And it's part of thinking about how do we disciple in the current cultural moment that we were just describing. And one of the things I just want to make clear that over and over again is like everything we're called to do in a response to Jesus, everything that's entailed in discipleship, needs to flow out of a heart that is, first of all, born again, and secondly, is being renewed by the power of the Spirit and is dependent on the power of the Spirit. Otherwise, it just becomes duty and it becomes drudgery. And man, I want to work with the Spirit, not against the stubborn human heart. I want to work with the Spirit. And so I just want to put that in front of our people. And Rich and I have had some good conversations about leading our people to desire more of the Spirit's fullness. And I desire that for our folks. I want to give them some good biblical grounding for that category. So these are the kinds of things we've been preparing for. I'm anticipating Easter as a really a big day for our church, and it's a time when we get to reach a lot of new people. So that's the first part of the year.
Yeah. I'm especially hopeful for what this New Life series has been, and I know you guys did a podcast on it. I haven't listened to it, which I will need to. But man, my desire for myself, for my family, for our church is that we would, through this New Life series, that we wouldn't neglect the new life that God has for us. That the old illustration of our sails would be up because the wind of the Spirit of God is blowing. And I think that I am as burdened for those who don't know Jesus as I am for those who are just sitting in church and their Christian life's just kind of stagnant. They're not going anywhere. And I actually gave this illustration of, I grew up on the Jersey Shore, Savior jokes for another time. But
but sailing on the
Yeah,
Jersey
but
Shore.
yeah, sure, yeah. And so there's such thing as sailing on the Jersey Shore, right? You don't necessarily want to go in the water.
For
but
those
you
who
want to sail on
know, you know Hunter's really into sailing metaphors lately. So
it. Have you been using them as well?
Oh, so much. I've been wearing them out.
Oh gosh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, guys.
No, it's okay.
But
It's good.
I remember like always going to the docks growing up. I still every time I go home, I go there. But you pass a bunch of docks, marinas on your way in, and I remember as a kid passing these docks that were just filled with sailboats that were just sitting there, and everything about the boat looked great. Sails folded up, hull looked strong, and like the sadness for me there when I see that, when I think about it, is they were made for the open water. They were made for sails to go up and catch the wind. And some of us are just docked, and there's no pursuit of God Himself. And man, I've just the words that God goes where He's wanted. That I think has been popularized by Church of the City in New York, really stands true. And that's what we've been trying to we've been asking God and trying to kind of pry our people to realize, hey, pursue the Lord, and the wind is blowing. Just prepare yourself, get your sails up, And I won't say anything else about a sailboat because I didn't know you already beat that horse.
Oh no, it's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
And I've been reading John Flavel. He has this little book called Navigation Spiritualized, and he writes it for sailors. And he translates the gospel and spiritual life into 31 sailing metaphors. He calls sailors seamen, Seamen. I've just been saying sailors for reasons that are obvious. And so anyway, but man, I used his first point in last week's sermon, which he says, as soon as you are born or born again, you are like a boat cast upon the sea. And the sea is always rocking. It's never still. It's always tumultuous. And a boat is basically always being beat around by the waves. That's life. And you're either going to die dramatically by being crashed by the waves, or you're going to die slowly by just growing old and leaky. Use that term. Yeah. I read it last week, and everyone's been talking to me about it. So it connected.
Yeah.
So I just got positive feedback on sailing metaphors. That was a long way to say that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to talk more about sailing, okay? Because this coming weekend, there's a French author. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name. I haven't YouTubed it, but it says this: if you want to build a ship, you've maybe heard this, right? If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And the picture there is that this life that God has for us, the Spirit of God is the painter. He is the painter of that life. And so we're not just like trying to concoct some obedience regimen and trying to kind of following Jesus isn't just a list of what to know and what to do, but it's actually always yearning and moving towards something. And obviously that culminates in glory. But like Christ in you, the hope of glory, Christ in you is leading you to that endless shore where we'll be with Him forever. So it's been fun sort of helping folks see that over the past few weeks.
I love it. Well, that kind of sets us up for what we're going to do in the second half of the year, and it really maybe gets us more into the fall. We are going to, as a whole church, we're going to turn 20 years old in September, and so we'll celebrate that big, and then we're going to, after that celebration is done, and we're going to start talking about what it means to be a church for the next generations to come, and how that's going to stretch us, how that's going to require us to change, how that's going to stretch our faith. So we're going to do that, and that is, to go back to our sailing metaphors, that is about getting our sails up so that what God is doing right now, we can just catch some of that wind, which has been one of my prayers. I was like, God, I don't want to watch a move of the Lord, especially among the younger generation in America. I don't want to just watch it happen in other churches, or I don't want to just watch it happen, on Instagram. I want to just get to play in that. It's far bigger than any one church or any of us. I just am jealous to get to play a little bit in that. And I think that's a healthy and a good ambition for a church, because we live in a city that always has fresh young people coming to it. It's been that way for 100 years, and for a church in Denver to be vital, it needs to always be looking to the next generation while being faithful with those that we have reached and discipling them and helping them grow into maturity and ultimately die well. We also want to always be attuned to the generation that's coming, and I think that's going. I hope that Fellowship Denver is asking this question 20 years from now, when I'm probably gone. They're asking about that generation, and I just want to have established a pattern of doing that over and over again. Right now, we've reached one. We've done it once. It's like a every 20-year kind of thing in some ways.
20-year run in Denver is a good run.
Is awesome, but I
Praise
want
God for
40.
that. Oh,
and like I do think like these changes happen about every 20 years, and so our kind of life as a church is kind of arriving at the same point. We need to be looking to that, and I hope that 20 years from now, this church is doing that again.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that's exciting to me, and I'm excited for the next 20 years of Fellowship Denver and beyond, what the Lord will do here. And I really loved what you said about, like, I want to play. I want to be part of that, And the thing about being a generational church is everybody plays in a generational church. Like, it's just like brings everybody everybody has a role, everybody has a part to play. It's the ordinary and the best of the ordinary of serving God and like the everyday, even the mundane, right? But it's also like we are moving forward together on mission, all of us playing a role in leading and serving and evangelizing and discipling. And I'm really looking forward to the fall for that.
Yeah. We'll talk about 5 years ago, 5-6 years ago, we did a little season. We called it First of the Lord, and we really imagined the next 5 years and how that would stretch us, how that would grow us as a people, what that would require of us. And our people really responded to that. Out of that came North Metro.
Yeah.
And so like you're here because of that. And all that God is doing in both of our congregations really is an outflow of that season. So we kind of want to have another one of those seasons. It's time to do another one of those seasons where we look ahead, we ask what that requires of us, not just in an activist way, but also what it requires of our hearts, what it requires of our openness and our willingness to say, Lord, everything we have is yours, and we want to play, in your kingdom. And so, we're going to do that this fall.
So some of our priorities, this is not exhaustive, but some of our priorities as a church, as we look ahead to 2026, are preparing our hearts, growing in our desire for the Spirit, and as Rich was saying, our desire for God, this pursuing God, experiencing this new life and the love of Jesus with God, and then hopefully inviting a bunch of people in for Easter. So asking God to prepare our hearts now, looking towards really what is a huge missional Sunday for us on Easter. And then as we look towards later in the year, celebrating with our church, celebrating God's faithfulness to us as we recognize our 20-year anniversary, and becoming a church that grows in our invitation to evangelism of and discipleship of the next generation. So becoming a church that invites in and disciples the next generation and gives them, as you were saying, Rich, leadership opportunities, and then asking God how he wants to use us and stretch us in giving, as you said, Hunter, all that we have to him, and asking those questions together later this year. So thank you for walking us through that. And hopefully, in the conclusion of this section, that summary gives those of you listening a way to...
You put a nice bow on that.
to have a handle.
You brought that together. I need to start sending you my sermon and letting you just help me with the conclusion, because the conclusion is the worst part of my sermon every week. I'm just like, I'm out of time, let's pray, So, I need that.
That was good. I was like, I did say that. Hunter did say that. That was good.
I listened to what you guys said and ascertained these are the priorities. Yes. So another question, though, which some of this came out in your answers to the first question, but what are you excited about right now? As you look at our church and our church family, what excites you for the year ahead?
Well, I'm first of all excited by the response we've had to talking about new life in Christ and what that means and pursuing the fullness of the Spirit. I've just had nothing but good conversations that have come out of that.
Yeah.
I would love Rich to talk a little bit about the evangelistic fruit we're seeing in our church right now. We had a big year for us baptism-wise last year, and I think the North Metro congregation in particular is seeing a lot of evangelistic fruit among young adults. I think we're set up to see some more of that at South Broadway as well. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we're baptizing 3 this weekend who, out of the New Life series, have surrendered their lives to Jesus. And what's been really fun at North Metro is seeing not just those who are on the platform and leading, kind of doing the work of ministry, but and not the only ones who are doing evangelism, but we're seeing our congregations step into that, inviting friends and family to church. One thing we did in the fall was called 100 Tables. And the idea of 100 Tables was for us to show the love of Jesus, practice hospitality. And if we have the opportunity to share the gospel, we want to do that. And we just asked everybody to set tables for their neighbors, their friends, their coworkers, grab coffee with them, have them over for dinner, and practice this. And what this has done is this kind of has lit a flame in our congregation to be praying and be hopeful for what conversations could be, or be praying after the fact. And we've seen fruit of that, of people coming to church and who have been disconnected to the church or from the church, and also not even ever part of a church. And we've seen fruit of folks coming, hearing the gospel, which has been really sweet. I'm starting to see what has been a few years of just really pushing, like, we need to tell everybody we know about Jesus. That's starting to come to fruition. And you see that in the 3 people we're baptizing this weekend. They heard the gospel from somebody in the congregation first. And even some of them started being discipled by them. So it's just activated the congregation in a way that's been really exciting.
That's so cool. We are here at South Broadway. We're really looking at starting a young adults specific ministry and a space to not just like get young adults together for social reasons. They will figure out how to do that, but to talk about the importance of this particular stage of life. Like when you're in your 20s and 30s, and you could be anywhere in your 20s and 30s, but you typically have some things to navigate and some decisions to make. And the way you do that is going to really set the course for the rest of your life. Not to say that you can't come to faith later in life or make big adjustments later in life, but you end up living out of the good decisions you made in your 20s and 30s, or you end up trying to recover from the decisions you made, and man, I just want to put in front of people that reality and help them navigate this well. Yeah, we have a team of young adults that's working on this, and we actually just met last night as we're recording, and we're really working on a space that we could invite people into. It's not just a space that church people would find interesting, but because it deals with these core human realities and that we need to face in this season of life. It's something they were sitting there last night going, man, I'm so excited to invite people and friends into this. So I just think that gives me hope for the year ahead, for the years ahead, really, and it gives me hope for how the Lord wants to use our church.
Yeah, definitely. It is exciting to think about the fruitful ministry that God is doing, not only through our organized ministries, but through the people in our churches. As Rich was explaining about what you've seen happening at North Metro. And so when our church family actually has a vision for inviting people into life with Christ, then we just see this effect, this fruitfulness multiplied. As you, as pastors, have your finger kind of on the pulse of fellowship, what would you say are areas that we as a church body need to grow in the year ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with these are similar themes to what we have been talking about, but I think we need to continue. I think we have grown in this, but I think we need to continue to grow in prayer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seeking the Lord, running after Him, learning to pray, right? Like, what does that actually look like to go after the Lord, ask, seek, knock, even just to praise Him as we go throughout our day? What does it look like to pray endlessly? And we've seen this heating up in our prayer rooms a little bit.
We have.
Yeah.
We have.
Which has been really fun.
I've been writing a little bit about spending time with God this month, and it occurred to me as I was kind of looking back over this in my own life. I was, at the same time, I was really in the early days of planting Fellowship Denver, along with Dave Moreland. I was in a season where I would say my personal fellowship with the Lord was not as vibrant as other seasons of my life, including right now. And so I think that I had a personal deficiency in leading out of the overflow of just the joy God is giving me in fellowship with Him and in pursuit of Him, and a deficit in a sense of dependence on Him. I had a little bit of a deficit of that when we planted the church, and I think unfortunately that deficit might have made it into the initial kind of spirit of our church. So I've really been convicted of that, and I think in the last in the last few years, I've just felt like I'm going to do everything I can to I can't atone for my mistakes. Only Christ can do that, but I can lead in a different way and put and call our church to a different spirit. So it's been really fun to just watch the Lord, I think, honor that. And it hasn't been a sudden kind of shift, but it has been I have seen noticeable progress. So I'm excited with the hunger we're beginning to have for prayer and for fellowship with the Lord and for reliance on His power for all that He's given us. And New Life is another example of that. And I just want us to keep growing in that, I want us to not stop. So
one of the things, Hunter, that I think is worth mentioning is that story is a great picture of what we're talking about right now. Like you are there's more new life coming to you. And if we started in a place of maybe this was a little bit of a deficit or just something that wasn't emphasized as much, for you to both have the humility and the way that you're seeking after the Lord, for Him to be able to be like, hey, this is something I want you to push on, is actually really great for us as a church to be able to press into that.
I think the spirit of the whole movement I was part of was more reliant on theology and good missiology, thinking out and the mission really well, strategizing well.
Which are great things.
Yeah, which are great things, but need to be married with the power of the Spirit. And I actually think it was one of the blind spots we had that led to us being caught off guard by some of the spiritual resistance that we faced. And so, man, one of the things that makes me love our younger folks is they don't seem to have that at all. If anything, like they need to learn strategy and that kind of stuff. But they are reliant on the Spirit. They love prayer. And I think that sets them up well to be ready for the opposition that is going to come. So I'm excited we're growing in that area, and we'll weave that in. We'll integrate that, is maybe the right way to say it, as we look ahead.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about also, as you're saying, our church can grow in prayer and grow in hunger for the Spirit. And these are ways perhaps in which the rising generation, actually, young adults, if their greater tendency is to already possess that hunger, or to that is ignited in them more easily, this is potentially a way that they can influence our church and lead us into more of that, desiring a fullness of the Spirit.
Yeah.
As a church, how can we, Fellowship in Arvada, in Denver, love our neighbors and impact our city during the year ahead?
I think we often answer that question in terms of like, what can we go out and do, which I want us to do. I mean, just think about the story Rich was just telling about they're going to baptize 3 people, and all of those people didn't hear the gospel first by coming to a church service. They they heard it from a friend, and they were invited by a friend, and then the work of the church just came alongside the work that those people were already doing. And that's how the body of Christ works. It's like, man, one arm of the body is out there, and then the whole body gets to participate in helping this person, come to faith. But so I think that's a great example of how I would answer this question. How I want to see us grow. I want to see us grow in personal boldness and personal heart for the lost, and I want to see us grow in a corporate desire to make space for people, And one of the ways I might say it is like when you are having that conversation with a friend, or someone needs the life of Christ, you feel like you can invite them to the church, not just because you like the church, but also because the church is going to make space for them, going to make room for them, And that stretches us for this reason. We're at a stage of life in our church where we're kind of full. Our lives are full, and I really like being comfortable and busy, like busy, full, and comfortable. Like
Yeah.
I love that's like where I like to live. It's like just man, give me lots of good work to do, and give me enough discretionary income that I can like fund my sweater habit, like just comfortable and busy,
I was relating you up until the sweater habit.
Well, for Rich, it would be like busy and in your Zen habit, so there you go. Whatever.
It's fair. It's fair.
Autumn, it's her vintage thrifting habit, we all have our comforts.
Yep.
And I can easily settle into being satisfied with that when the Lord wants far more for me than just to be busy and comfortable. And he may actually want me to not be as busy so that I can make room for the most important things. He may want me to stretch into some areas that are just uncomfortable for me, but he's going to stretch my capacity in that. He may not want me to be comfortable, but be uncomfortable, And so these are the kinds of things that I think we need to be thinking about and asking it as a church, what that means for us individually and corporately.
Yeah. And I think the best way that happens is when we assume that there's a great hunger out there with the people we run into. Like, there just needs to be an assumption that like people need Jesus, right? Like life might look buttoned up. If we don't know that they know him, like we need to just assume that they need him. And I'm really convinced, and I mean this for even my own heart, right? That there is a greater hunger out there than obedience in here, like in the church, right? And I think that more people are willing. Here's the beauty of 3 people being baptized at North Metro on Sunday and hearing the gospel from one of the folks that are part of Fellowship Denver before they came. Hey, that's the gospel in action. That's people being obedient to the Lord and following his spirit, right? But it's not a cop-out for you to just invite people to church when you know that we are going to preach the gospel here.
That's right.
And when you know that we're going to be hospitable here. Mm-hmm. And so the other end of that, and you were getting at this, Hunter, is that when we are gathered on Sundays, everybody plays when it comes to new people coming in. Like we need to be so alert for them. We need to, like every time and I know I'm one of the pastors here, right? But like every time I'm going to church on a Sunday, I'm praying on the way that the Lord would give me 2 unique conversations and even lead me maybe in how those conversations should go or who those people are, right? Like we need to come to church ready, not just, yes, we want to receive, but we also want to give and we want to serve others. And sometimes that means like we're not going to sit down. Not that anybody sits down when service actually begins. Everybody's 5 minutes late walking in, right? But like, we're not going to sit down until we, say hey to a couple people we don't know, or we're going to do all that we can to go and touch base with the person who's sitting alone. These things really matter for facilitating a place where people feel invited in and could even open them up to hear the gospel maybe a little bit more easily. God's going to do what he wants, but we help with that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the vibrancy of the worship and the vibrancy of the congregation adds credibility, visible, feelable credibility to the gospel being proclaimed. And so it's not just all on the preacher to preach a great gospel message. but the congregation adds to that in their joy, in their welcome, in their vibrancy. We all add to that. We all have a part to play.
It's so true. One of the guys up at North Metro that just gave his life to Jesus, he describes himself as, these are his words, this is his word, not mine. He describes himself as a quote, dirtbag his whole life. And he started coming to church, and he said to me, he said, everyone here seems so happy. And I was like, hey man, you know what's crazy about that? Like, that's the gospel of Jesus. That we're happy in Jesus. In fact, I actually said that's a joy that God gives us, because I told him, I said, when I'm up on the platform and I look around the room, some people are going through hell, but there's still joy there. And what you're experiencing, like what you're seeing, is actually what New Life does. And so, yeah, I agree. When people walk in, the way we worship, the way we even like sit down, I'm like, hey, walk in, sit towards the front, sing loud. You know what I mean? Because we get to embody worship, not just by being present here, but to actually like dig into it,
Seeking God to grow us in the ways that you're talking about, asking for God to ignite this desire for us for more of the Spirit, to grow in the areas of prayer, and really praying for God's power to be at work in and through us, growing in being a space that is very invitational and extends a big welcome to everyone who comes in to any of our gathered spaces, particularly on Sundays during our worship services. Growing in all of these areas as a church family will require something of its leadership too. So as you look at our church, are there any areas that you can identify that you see God asking you to grow as pastors so that you can continue to lead our church into this year and to continue seeking God in the ways that you're talking about today?
I think I mentioned one, which is just my own personal dependence on the Lord. Yeah. And I also am at a season, and I think Rich is probably in a similar place. He can speak for himself, but I'm definitely in a place where I'm at capacity, and I have to step back and ask, what are the absolute most important things for me to give myself to, and what can I do well, but it's not the most important things for me to do, and how can I rely on the body to do some of it? And by the body, I mean the members of the church, and also mean our staff team and the leadership team we have here, which we have great people, on our team. And so my challenge is to lean into the best things the Lord has given me to do that make the most impact, not try to do everything, not say yes to everything, not run so hot and so hard that I'm out of step with the Spirit. I don't have time to pray. I don't have time to reflect and to look back prayerfully at what I'm doing and where we're going, and you have to create some margin for that. And so it's still having a full plate, but filling your plate with maybe slightly different things than everything I'm kind of doing right now. So that's a big challenge in my own leadership at this kind of stage of fellowship, and it's uncomfortable because I have learned a certain way of operating that's gotten me to this point, and yet it's probably not going to help the church go to the next place. So I've got to serve in a different way.
I just echo what he said. And I thought those two things right off the bat. I need to continue to be dependent on the Lord. I hope that never stops. I think that's like an ever-growing thing, right? And sometimes it requires you to like find like some well-worn paths might maybe it's good for you to like find another path, and even just seeking the Lord and what that could look like. But also for me, it is growing in my leadership, creating margin, reprioritizing, and just figuring that out as we continue to grow, and as even things that I need to lead and steward grow. I need to figure out how to do that really well and rely on good brothers and sisters around me to pick things up and empower them to do so,
Well, how would you encourage our church to pray this year. So as we seek to grow in prayer, we've talked about some of the specific ways already that we can pray, but for the sake of calling them out, what are themes that you would encourage our whole church family to pray together for, to seek God for this year?
Where my mind goes is like pray for the lost by name. Even if it's just one person, like we talk about one more. Who would know if God used you to reach one more person? Who would it be? Pray for them persistently by name. Pray for fullness of the Spirit, and then pray for God to make it evident to you what obedience, joyful obedience, will require of you that is different than how you currently live, and just be open to how He responds.
Yeah. All of those things, but I would also maybe not directly answer your question. I would say, like, when you think about praying, actually pray. Like this year, if you just, like, every time you thought about praying or every time you told someone you'd pray for them, actually do it. Even when if you are around Fellowship Denver or you're around this area, or even if you go to some church somewhere else, you're just listening to this podcast, on a Sunday, if you have somebody who you're hearing what is happening in their life and you want to pray for them, like, ask them if you could put a hand on their shoulder and pray right there. Begin to build that muscle, and then praying for things like more of the Spirit, which we see in the book of Acts. Like the Spirit's always with us, in us. We're indwelled by the Spirit as His sons and as God's sons and daughters. But there's also moments of filling that prepare us for what is directly ahead to accomplish something. So we want to pray for more of the Spirit. We want to pray that our hearts would be open to the mission of God. But I think even a step back is, when you think about praying, pray. And if you don't think about it, put reminders in your life to pray. Post-it notes are great. Put an alarm on your phone. This eventually will just get us in tune with going to the Lord more and more.
This is such a great way to conclude our conversation today. And I think of something you mentioned earlier, Rich, a quote that you shared that said, God goes where He's wanted. And as we look back at the history of the church and the movement of God throughout history, the way that He used His people to expand His kingdom, to continue to be light and to be salt in every one of those moves of the Spirit throughout history, God's people prayed and sought Him. And one of the stories that comes to mind is the story of Aldersgate Chapel before the Wesleyan revival in the 1700s. And John Wesley established this small chapel, and the Moravians gathered and just prayed faithfully for some time. And in so many moves of the Spirit throughout history, that pattern has repeated itself. God's people came together, they prayed, they surrendered themselves to God and said, how do you want to use us? And then God always uses that to move into a really fruitful season of ministry and of growth of His kingdom. So I'm so encouraged by this conversation. Thank you for spending time with me on the podcast today. And we're going to continue thinking about how we prepare our hearts. So next week on the podcast, we're going to talk about Lent and how the season of Lent is a season of preparation as we look together, as our Fellowship Denver family looks together towards Easter. So I'm excited to continue this theme in our conversations ahead as well. Grateful for both of you and the work that you do. So glad that we get to work together and to know about each other's sweater and Zen habits. It's a gift. It's a gift. But to those of you listening, if today's episode raised any questions for you, we periodically weave in Q&R episodes. So as you're listening to us talk today, if this brought any questions to mind, send them to us. We would love to know what is on your mind as you're looking ahead at 2026. And as always, you can send us suggestions about what you'd like us to discuss on the podcast in the future. Send all of that to podcast@fellowshipdenver.org. Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Special thanks to Adam England for our theme music, to Jesse Cowan, our producer, and to Judd Connell, who provides transcription for these episodes.